He says, I'm 56 years old and have no debt. I have 1.4 million in the bank and want to know how much is enough for me to feel comfortable retiring. 1.4 million sounds like a lot, but I don't have a good handle on how long that would last. That's a really good question, Dave, and I feel like a lot of people kind of have that thought in their mind. I've got this money. How do I know if it's enough? How do I know if I can retire or when I can retire? And I feel like it's more about being able to and being happy with living off the interest. So if you looked at 1.4 million and it's invested, let's say that you're averaging a 10% rate of return, are you able to live on the 10% comfortably with inflation, with all of your expenses? So in his case, $140,000 a year. Does that feel right? If you feel like yes, then great.
It'll last forever.
It'll last forever because you're never touching the principal.
Yeah, it'll keep laying the golden eggs.
That's right. And that's really where you want to be. You don't ever want to have to touch that money. But if you're looking at that and you're like, oh, I don't know, like living on 140,000, I've been living off of 200. If you've got a house payment, there's so many things to consider. But that's ultimately, at the end of the day, what we want to be looking at is living off the interest and if that's possible for you. So.
Yeah, and here's a simple equation, and it is probably overly simple, but just to kind of give you an idea. All right. Inflation, not counting lately, or counting lately actually, for the last 75 years has averaged 4%, 4.2%. Okay, now lately we've been closer to 10.
Sure.
And in the 70s we were at 12. But the average over the last 75 years is 4.2. All right. Now, the average stock market rate of return is 11.8 since the stock market began. That's the average annual return if you had invested in growth stock mutual funds across the stock market, okay? Now, so if we just use rough numbers, let's say 12% rate of return, which my personal mutual funds have averaged that for decades now. So averaged. Some years not, some years a lot more. Average.
That's right.
Remember sixth grade math.
Can you explain
average?
Because I know all the time people fight us on that. The difference between annual or like annualized rate of return, looking at it over the track record of it.
Just look at and say, what did you make? Okay, because this is how wealthy people look at it. They go, all right, if I'm making 12 and I'm losing 4 in purchasing power because of inflation, the cost of bread went up, the cost of electricity went up, the cost of cars and tires went up, the cost of ... went up 4%. So if I'm making 12 and I'm losing 4 in purchasing power, if I pull off 8, my mutual funds will grow by 4 a year, but they have to do that to break even in purchasing power. So if you're earning 12 and pulling off 4, you're getting a cost of living raise every year, but it's a cost of living raise. It's not anymore. You're not gaining actual wealth,
right? It's
net of inflation. You're gaining actual dollars to offset the inflation. Okay,
right.
So if you did that, and if you want to use different numbers, use different numbers. Use 11 and 5, then you'd pull off 6. Okay, I don't care, but that's how you can go at it. So if you got $1 million and you pull off 8, that's 80,000. That means you made 120, so your million grew by 40,000, and you lived on the 80. Then, so if you can live off of 8% and you're invested in good mutual funds, you probably pretty much do it in perpetuation. It might dip into it a little, and it might refill in another year.
Yeah.
But overall, it'll pretty much run like a machine the rest of your life, assuming that the American economy continues to do what it has done for the last 80 years.
Well, and this is one of those reasons it's so important to do what we teach: pay off your debt, pay off your mortgage, so that when you're going into retirement, your cost of living is not sky high, right?
And let me tell you something else. Here, there are some really stupid people that write financial articles all over the internet. And here's what's stupid about them. All right. They run all these numbers out in great detail on math, and they do not grasp that life will never, ever happen the way they laid it out.
Right.
So the way we just laid this out, do you think that the chances that guy's 1.4 million, that he's going to live on exactly 140 or exactly 8% of that,
right,
which would be more like 100. Okay, is he actually going to do it exactly that way? Are those mutual funds going to earn exactly a market rate of return, or are they going to make a little more or a little less?
That's right.
what's going to actually happen is he's probably going to live on less than that, and this money's going to grow. And there's some other factors that we haven't even considered in this, like his life and his health.
Absolutely.
And his marriage, and an inheritance comes or doesn't come in addition to this. There's all kinds of other crap that's going to happen. And so these guys, when they're writing these financial articles, act like, well, I mean, if you miss this by 0.2%, you're not going to make it. You can't estimate this. You can't forecast it within 0.2%. If you're, unless you're God, you don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
And I promise you, God is not writing financial articles on TikTok. Okay, it's definitely not happening. So I can tell because the people doing it are idiots, and God's fairly smart. So the point is, these guys are become such math nerds. They think all this stuff operates in an exact little vacuum, and it never works out that way. I mean, can you imagine if today, with I've got hundreds of millions of dollars worth of real estate today. None of that was in my equation.
Right.
None of it.
Yeah.
I mean, all you do is be one piece of real estate off.
That's right.
And the whole thing changes. So, you're in one way or the other. One business that you sell, or that has a hit and booms.
That's right.
One little thing. So you can't. You're 30 years old. You can't predict when you're 70 exactly where you're going to be, but you can have a target.
That's right.
And say, based on that target, I know that if I'm 25 years old and I average 12% and I put $100 a month away from age 25 to age 65, that the math tells me that's $1,176,000. Is it going to happen exactly that way? I just said it wasn't. But that's what the math can predict for you. It can go, oh, so we could have over $1 million. So we have hope. We're not going to wait on Karl Marx and socialism to fix this.
Right.
We're actually going to work and save and live on less than we make and be on a budget and keep our butts out of debt.